Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Continue to do some broadcasts tonight. Been able to do some things I didn't have to do a whole lot outside today, and so I'm going to try to teach myself some things while I read this particular book. Uh, this is a book called Sacred Geometry by Robert Lawlor. It's a work that Phil Langdon suggested me to read. Most of what I read is from Phil Langdon or a few other people I know of, but basically Phil Langdon who suggested these books to read. So I try to read these to understand some deeper things, and I hope that you would have the desire to do that also. After all, we are spiritual beings, but we are living in a physical body, and most of us are not connected with the spirit, that is, our own spirit. So this is a sacred geometry. This is chapter 6, I think it is. The reading from this particular book. This is called Gnomonic, Expansion and the Creation of Spirals. So let me change one thing here. And when me and Phil had met about 2 weeks ago, we talked about Robert Lawlor, and we both thought he was still living. He's no longer living. Yes, he passed away, I think in 2020, I think it is. I think it's what I read here. Day, I think it was. So he's no longer living. I thought he was in England, but he's not. He was here in America. So let's change this over real quick. So this is again is from Sacred Geometry. There are certain things, said Aristotle, quote, which suffers no alteration, I should say, save in magnitude when they grow, end quote. He was referring here to the phenomenon the Greek mathematicians called their gnomonic and the type of growth based upon it, known as gnomonic expansion. That's spelled Gnomonic, expansion. Hero of Alexandria defined it as follows: quote, "Gnomonic is any figure which, when added to a original figure, leaves a resultant figure similar to the original," end quote. The contemplation of this figure leads to a understanding of nature's most common forms of growth by accretion or cumulative increase, in which the old form is contained within the new. This is the way the more permanent tissues of the animal body, such as bones, teeth, horns, and shells, develop, in contrast to the soft tissue, which is discarded and replaced. This familiar kind of growth has often been presented architecturally, I should say, as the design theme of a building. The Hindu temple is an excellent example of this. The floor was begun by placing together 4 bricks, each 1 foot square, forming thus the square of 2. Then expanded this platform to the square of 3, and so forth. Each sequentially expansion was considered as expansion of the altar of sacrifice. In that whole temple recapitulated is as seeing seed the altar or original square. Thus, the building itself expressed the meaning of, quote, sacrifice, end quote, which implies a reduction to that which is sacred. Both in plan and in volume, the typical Hindu temple displays the kind of gnomonic growth most obviously displayed in seashells, where the residues of the previous stage of growth remain clearly indicated as part of the structure and design of subsequent stages. This method of forming, or I should say figuring, the gnomonic shows its relativity or relationship to the Pythagorean formula a squared minus b squared equals c squared, shown here in the gnomonic increase from the square surface area of 4 to the square of 5, where the gnomonic of the larger square 5 is equal to 1/4 of the initial square of 4. So the floor plan, you can actually, I think I've downloaded the page here so you can read this along, or you can look at it later on, whatever way you want to do. The floor plan of the typical Hindu temple is simple, concentric, gnomonic expansion of initial square as the mandala reflects the celestial order. Each square contains the name of a deity. Gnomonic, as a succession of increments of growth, defines a passage through time. This expansion in the Hindu temple is an extension of the initial square, which is the altar of sacrifice, the container of the symbolic cosmic fire. So time is repeated as a relentless, expanding fire of life, throwing outward and consuming again the forms held at potential in the initial seed altar. The gnomonic mandala of the floor plan is also used as the guiding element for designing the elevation of the temple. There are interesting developments of growth and number through gnomonic expansion. One mathematical characteristic is that all figures which grow by gnomonic expansion creates intersections upon which spirals can be drawn. These forms, as Jill, Jill, Purse, Purce, has so beautifully shown in the mystical spiral, are everywhere in nature. Spiral trunks of huge eucalyptus trees, the horns of rams and reindeer, our skeleton bones, the shells, the molluscid shells, particularly the Nodius pompilus, which follows the spiral derived from the golden proportion. Spirals can be found in the successive florals of the sunflower, in the outline of a cordiform leaf, in a lock of hair, or a snake coil, or an elephant trunk, an umbilical cord, or in the correlate of the inner ear. All these spirals are a result of the process of gnomonic growth, of which the square and its gnomonic can be, and so I'm sorry, I said gnomic, can be considered the archetypical form. This diagrams from D'Abria Thompson on growth and from show that spirals can be drawn from the gnomonic growth of triangles and hexagons. So in the workbook, we will go into this. It's all gnomonic spirals. The following demonstration give an insight into the ancient mathematical method for generating whole numbers ratios which closely approximate to the incomprehensible functions. This method is attributed to the Greek mathematician Diopharius, but is probably part of the much older mathematician knowledge. We can find in these demonstrations the integration of gnomonic growth, the important additive number progressions, the progression of sacred rectangles, and the number ratio which approach the sacred roots of 2, 3, and 5. All these gnomonic operations become the basics for the formation of spiral curvatures, which serve as a model for a vast range of universal movement from particle to galaxy. We begin with two identical additive, I should say, progressions already encountered in relation to phi in page 57. we can observe how these same number series can also be conceived as a progressive of expanding, whirling rectangles in spiral forms. Our method will be to compare the relationships between the progressions emerging from the two essential creative relationships, 1 to 2 and 1 to 3. In order to do this, one series will be considered as a succession, I should say, of numerators, and the other as a succession of denominations, or denominators, I should say. We shall begin with the formation of a spiral based on square root of 5. And what it does is simply goes from origin from 1 to 3, to 4 to 7, to 11, to 18, to 29, to 47, to 76, to 123. That's 1 to 3 ratio. To the 1 to 2 ratio, it's 1 to 1, then it's 3 over 1. I should have done it this way. 4 over 2, 7 over 3, 11 over 5, 18 over 8, 29 over 13, 47 to 21, 76 to 34, and then 123 over 55. These are two characteristics of these progressions of fractions that should be emphasized. That is, first, the higher we go in the series, the more closely the relationship between the numerator and the denominator approaches the incommensurable root of 5. For example, the function from our series of 2, 9, that is slash over 13, equals 2.230. Is approximation of a little below the square of 5. But the next fraction, 47 over 21, is 2.23809, is approximation this time a little above the true value of the square of 5. The following fraction, or function, I should say, fraction, 76 over 34 is 2.235. Is again below the incommensurable root, but much closer than the previous ratio of 123 over 53, which equals 2.236. 36 is above, yet still near the desired ratio. The pattern is again an oscillation above and below, ever approaching near the supra-rational root. The second characteristic is that we can conceive of these successive numerical relationships as spatial forms, that is, squares and rectangles. To transform this series into a spatial configuration, we simply consider 1 as the size of a square area and add a succession of squares to our existing figure, with the side of each new square equal to the preceding expansion of initial figures. And again, like we did earlier, it's 1 to 1, 2 to 3, 5 to 8, 13 to 21, 21 to 34, 34 to 55, 55 to 89, and 144, etc. The originating 1 to 2 rectangle is already formed from 1 plus 1. So the length 2 becomes the size of the square, which is added to the original rectangle, giving 3. This 3 becomes the side of a new square, which is added to the preceding 3 over 2 rectangle, giving the new relationship of 3 over 5. Relationship between two successive numbers of this series tends to approach 4. The logarithmic function of pi, again, see page 56, allows one to find by taking 3 successive numbers of this series, the unity of pi square, for example, since 1 plus pi equals 1 square. Equals pi squared. Exactly as the sum of 8 and 13 equals 21. And the relationship of 13 to 8 can be considered as a value approaching that of pi, while 21 over 8 is a value of pi squared. We now take our series of numerators, I should say, and transform them into spatial configurations by considering the relationship of 1 to 3 as a rectangle, and proceed to, as before, by the addition of a square. The first square is to have a side of 3. When added to the original rectangle, gives the relationship of 3 to 4. The second square will have 4 as its side, which will be added to 3 equals 7, giving the second relationship of 4 to 7. And continuing, and it's this way, we form this series of numbers of 1 to 3, to 4, to 7, to 11, to 18, 29, and 76, and 123, and 199, 199, etc. This is another sequence of numbers different from the one attributed to the Fibonacci, but again, the relationship between successive terms tends towards pi, and each is formed by the addition of the two preceding terms. We can now reunite their two series, each of which has pi, or the relationship between each two successive terms, and which between them defines square over pi, square phi. The spiral is formed from the unity. Using this method, we can develop the plan from three spirals whose curvatures express these geometric and proportional laws. So in drawing 6.1, the root is 5 spirals starting from ratio 1 to 2, and then 1 to 3, with the square root square being 2 spiral, or begin again with the 2, create a relationships of 1 to 2 and 1 to 3 to initiate progressions which will form the numerators and denominators of a series of fractions. Again, origin of first is 1 to 3 at the top, bottom is 1 to 2. So we have 1 to 1 at first, and then we have 3 over 2. Then we have 7 over 5, 17 to 12, I should say, 41 over 29, and then 99 over 70. So the first number at the top is called diagonal numbers, and the bottom was called integral numbers. Here we find two variations from the square 5 formation described above. In this instance, neither progression begins with the repeating number 1. And here we have, instead of the simple additive series, additional each time the size of the two squares. The growth is made by the additions of two similar squares having the larger side, I should say, of the preceding rectangle, I should say, for size. Thus, to the original 1 to 2 rectangle adds 2 square, leaving 2 for their sides to give a side of 1 plus 2 plus 2 equals 5. Then to the 2 to 5 rectangle, add 2 squares of side 5, which adds to makes up 2 plus 5 equals 12, you see. To the original 1 to 3 rectangle, we add 2 squares of side 3, making 1 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 7. And to this 7, we add 2 squares of side 7, that is 3 plus 7 equals 17. The series 1 to 2 to 5 to 12 to 30 to 29 represents the size of the square in which the diagonals are respectively 1 to 3, 7 to 17, and 41, etc. The ratio between these two series, moving away from unity, the unity that is, as Theon, Theon, puts it, being virtually the side and the diagonal, approaches closely and closer to square over 2. Drawing 6.2, the square root of 2 spirals starting from ratios of 1 to 2 and 1 to 3, but with the successive additions of 2 squares with only a few modifications in the general procedure, we can now constantly construct, that is, the progression and the spiral related to the square over 3. Variations are that in this case, the relationship 1 to 3 begins 1 to 1 and 1 to 3 rather than 1, 3, and provides the denominators instead of a numerators as it did in the other two spirals. For the square of 5 spiral, we successfully add 1 square, and for the square over 2 spiral, we successfully add 2 squares, whereas in this case, we will add first 2 squares, then 1 square. So again, it's like this is 1 to 2 at the top and 1 to 3 at the bottom. You first start up with the numbers of 1 to 2. Then when you go from there to 2 to 5, sorry, I'm saying 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 5 to 3, 7 over 4, 19 to 11, 26 to 15, 71 over 41, and then 97 to 55, etc., or square over 3 over 1. In starting from the origin of 1 to 2, we add 2 squares of size 2 to total 1 plus 2 equals 5. then a single square of side 5 to make 2 plus 5 equals 7, continuing to follow this alternation of the addition of 2, then of 1 square. Originating figure 1 to 3 is constructed exactly the same way. It provides a series of numerators listed above. As in the case of the first two roots, it is the superimpositional of the numerators and the denominators which provide the relationship constituting the square over 3. Because of the symptomatic addition of first 2 then 1 square, it is impossible in this construction to draw both the internal and the external spirals. The square over 3 being the formative principle acts only as the containing or external spiral. Drawing 63 demonstrations of the construction of the spirals has been taken in part from the Temple der Phänomene by R.A. Schwaller of Lewitz. So I know who Schwaller is. He's the one who and his wife went to Egypt and did all the measurements there of those temples, and they're exactly precise. There's no, and so how do you do that? You see, so this is where it's just giving you an illustration of this, so to speak. Yeah, anything by R.A. Schwaller is very good. The Lewitz, he was a Frenchman. His wife also accompanied him, which was very helpful. And they spent 15 years of their life in Egypt back in the 1930s. I think it was 1930s. The deeper purpose for this development of the spiraling of numbers around the supra-rational roots comes from the fact that we have a model for the way an indefinable cause, that is the root, can express itself in a play of definable numbers and forms. The spiral is still our most profound image for the movement of time. Therefore, it is central to our vision of evolution. The following passage from Sarah SRI, I should say, Aro Mendo, quote, the problem of rebirth, end quote, precisely verbalizes what we have just experienced of universal law through the language of geometry. What is around us is a constant process of unfolding in its universal aspect. The past terms are there, contained in it, fulfilled, overpassed, but in general and in various types, still repeated as a support and background. The present terms, that is, are there not as a unprobable recurrence, but in active, pregnant gestation of all that is yet to be unfolded by the Spirit. No irrational decimal recurrence, helplessly repeating forever its figures, but an expanding series of powers of the infinite. This is surely the will in things which moves great and deliberate, unhasting and unresting through whatever cycles towards a greater and greater informing of its own figures with its own infinite reality. While contemplating the seed head of a shoot of pearl grass, we can understand in view of the above demonstration on the formation of spirals, the ancient tantrum aphorism. Form is the envelope of pulsation. The logarithmic spiral is so rich in geometric and algebraic harmonics that traditional geometers names it spira, S-P-I-R-A, mirabilis, miraculous spiral. While the while the radius of the spiral increases in a geometric progression, the radial angle increases in a arithmetic progression. These are the two numerical progressions which yield all the ratios from which the musical scales are constructed. So we can find in these spiraling of genomic figures a close association between the temporal laws of sound and the proportionate laws of space. The growth of the human brain seems to have evolved through a genomic expansion. The same bulb, that is the inter or hind brain in brackets, which dominate during the reptilian phase of evolution, is still present within us. Above this is the midbrain limbic area, which was the dominant mental apparatus during mammalian evolution, and finally came the emergence of the cerebral cortex in higher man. Gnomonic expansion in nature makes visible patterns of successful stages of growth. This relates to our notices of time in an interesting way. Ordinarily, we conceive of time either as a fleeing directional movement from a dissolving past through an imperishable present towards a imaginary future, or mystical in what we call as all containing eternal fullness. The Gnomonic principle as a third description of time. This is time as a expanding growth upon growth, as evolution, one might say, belonging to the conscious energies which transcends their transitorial forms and substances. As Chinese wisdom says, quote, the whole body of spiritual consciousness progresses without pause. The whole body of material substance suffers decay without intermission. In such a model, past time remains present as form, and the formation grows through pulsation, rhythmic, gnomonic expansion to remove the most recent accretive layer or compartment from a nautilus shell is actually to move backwards in its lifetime. Logarithmic developed forms always carry this element of retention of past time, thereby symbolizes the evolution not of substance but of consciousness. Interesting. In dynamic times, all phases exist in ever-present layers like the light year, LIGHT. Structures of galactic space, which makes every glance in the starry night sky a view into the past of distant bodies. While the layers of light just behind the visible light are the future energy waves which will strike and influence the Earth. All aspects of the material world, including our own bodies, are therefore in the past tense, existing in a residue dynamic layer already bypassed by inflowing cosmic energies. This is a rather disturbing idea, yet not dissimilar to our ancestry notions of time. The I can't pronounce, I'll just say ATHARVA, Atharva Veda says, name and form are in the residue. The world is the residue. Intro and agro are in the residue. The universe is in the residue. Heaven and earth, all existence is in the residue. The water, the ocean, the moon, and the wind are in the residue. In Egyptian onychography, the square is a gnomonic appear on the throne of Osiris, upon which the king takes his seat. The enthroned king, as representative of the eternal solar power on earth, is thus appropriately associated with the fixed element, the square, which is gnomic, that which is constant through growth and change. Yet this throne is also the throne of Osiris, the divinity representing the cyclical patterns of change in nature in his otherworldly kingdom of potentiality. In this sense, the throne is the fixed support upon which Osiris' cycle of flux must rest. So there's a showing here. The throne upon which Osiris sits is clearly depicted as the square of 4. As it transformed into the square of 5, though, square of 5 through the principle of square over 5, on which all the pi proportions rest. It is therefore shown as the seat of the world of transformations through death and rebirth, represented by Osiris. This figure also images the passage from 4 to 5. That is from the elementary or mineral realm associated with the number 4 to the realm of life associated with the number 5, since nature begins to create a pentagon figure only with the advent of life. This original unity within the 4 squares of 2 over square is projected outward to form the gnomic, the 5th part, which is equal in area to each of the other 4 squares. The living king is not only the earthly representative of the eternal solar power, he is also Horus, the son of Osiris, who receives and brings his father's essence, that is his force, into the world again. The relation of father to son, or of the dead king to the living king, was greatly stressed in traditional society and can be seen as the pulsation of the gnomic retention of the past into the present and future. If the power and influence of the dead king, that is the father, are related to the original square and the energies and activities of the living king to gnomic expansion, we have an image of a social order based upon the relation of the individual to his ancestral community. The amazing continuity of ancient Egyptian culture over 3 millennia demonstrates a continual innovation in which it seems that nothing of the essential experience of the past was ever lost. The square and gnomic then serve as an archetype image of certain kinds of growth in nature, and as an image of time and of evolution itself. Such a figure has the value of helping one see beyond the surface of things to identify an underlying pattern, a function with its own dynamics and mechanisms. In a philosophical approach to geometry, we are attempting the contemplation of characteristically of form as carrying a meaning into themselves. There is a teleological message contained, for instance, in the spiral itself, where it moves in successively opposite directions towards the ultimate expression of both the infinite expanded and the infinite contracted. The spiral is constantly approaching these 2 incomprehensible aspects of the ultimate reality, and therefore symbolize a universe moving towards the perfect singularity from which it arose. Thus, the spiral like arms of our galaxy constitutes an image of the continuality between fundamental, polarized to infinite and finite, macrocosm to microcosm. The Egyptian temple of Lawlor. This is an example of this from the gentleman I spoke of earlier. It was from France. So I'm trying to remember his name. R.A. Schwoller, the little bits. I read his books, I guess probably a year ago, maybe a little longer. Phil Langdon suggested that book to read. It blows my mind what the Egyptians knew back then. It just blows my mind because simply as they knew what they were doing. They were far advanced in anything else at that time. So the Egyptian temple was like a Hindu temple. The principles of gnomic growth in its architecture, but in a much different manner. Here are the phrases of the temple's construction, which are directed by the various pi proportions of the initial square of the inner sanctuary, are a coincidence with the phrases of growth of a human body. which the whole of a temple plan symbolizes. So that's the ending of chapter 6 tonight of Sacred Geometry. Thank you for being here. A little longer than I thought it would go through, but this is important for us to know. Again, this Gnomonic expansion and the creation of spirals from sacred geometry. And this is all from the Creator, God. You see. So thank you for being here tonight. This is the 5th day of February 2026. Wish you well. Take care. Have a good night.